Hey everyone, I'm Leslie Richardson from the Visual Studio Extensibility team, and welcome to this talk on what's new for both existing and aspiring extension developers in Visual Studio 2022. So VS 2022 is super exciting. There are a lot of major updates to it, including 64-bit, which can help improve performance across the board. And there have never been more ways to customize your ideal development environment with additions such as color tabs or themes or just all the new GitHub integrations than there have been in this version. But for a lot of people, creating that ideal development environment is not complete without the extensions that they've come to know and love, and that's where you all fit in as extension authors. So the goal for this talk is to share with you some steps for how to successfully migrate your extension to Visual Studio 2022 so that everyone can continue taking advantage of all the awesome productivity and customization add-ons that your extension offers, while also introducing a new toolkit that can help you write your extensions even faster and easier than before. So let's check it out. So migration is the first and probably most important topic that we'll be discussing today. In order for your extensions to continue being used in Visual Studio 2022, you're going to have to follow a couple migration steps that we're going to demonstrate today. All right, so I am currently in Visual Studio 2022, and I've got this 2019 extension that I've written that I'd like to migrate to VS 2022. And after doing all my modernization updates, so making sure that my .NET framework is still compatible with Visual Studio 2022, as well as any other package references, we can get into the core of migration, which comes down to creating two separate V6s. You want to create two projects, one that targets Visual Studio 2019 and lower, and the other one that is targeting Visual Studio 2022. And both of these V6 projects are going to be tied together by what's called a shared project, which allows us to share code that's going to be similar between the two versions. And the reason why we are setting up the extension in this way when migrating is because we need to address all of the breaking API changes and interop assembly changes that have happened in the transition to 2022. Of which there are a lot of, especially with the addition of 64-bit. So in order to make sure that certain assembly references work in one version but not in the other, then we can use the shared project setup to differentiate between the two fairly easily. So I've got my 2019 targeting project, and the first thing that I'm going to do is just add my shared project to this solution. So create a new project, go into shared. I'm going to call mine add author _ shared. Okay. So there's my shared project. Of course, we need to include a reference to that project in the 2019 project. So let's go to reference, add that. So now the question becomes, what goes in this shared project? So usually most of your CS and RESX files are fair game, anything you intend to share between both versions of your extension. So specifically your commands, your tool windows, that sort of thing. And that's what I'm going to add in mine. So as for what not to add to this shared folder, you don't want to add your VSCT file, but you do want to make sure that your build action under properties is set to VSCT compile. And there you go. And you want to make sure that your include in V6 property is set to false. And similarly, you also don't want to move your V6 manifest, which we're going to play around with in a second. So we've got the VS 2019 project set up, and we have the shared folder or the shared project. And now we're going to add the VS 2022 project, which I've already set up. So I'm going to add an existing project and go find that. Great, so there is our VS 2022 project, and there's a couple things that we need to address here in order to actually get this extension to run properly in VS 2022. So the first being, let's add a reference to that shared project like we did with the 2019 one. So there it is. And then we need to make sure that we have our NuGet packages updated, specifically the SDK and the build tools ones. And you want them to target a 17.0 version of Visual Studio. And this is what we'll allow us to continue using the extension libraries and APIs in Visual Studio 2022. All right, so from there, we're going to modify our v6 manifest. I'm going to open up the code version because we're going to add a different tag manually. So first and foremost, make sure that your installation target is set to 17.0 to 18.0. And then inside your installation target, we're going to add a new tag called product architecture. So this is like the money shot right here. This is something that you have to make sure that you have. Otherwise, your users won't be able to install Visual Studio and won't be able to install your extension in Visual Studio 2022, and we don't want that. So we're going to add 64, and this is accounting for the fact that Visual Studio is 64-bit, therefore your extension needs to be compatible with 64-bit VS. And also make sure you update your prerequisites to go to 17.0 to 18.0 as well. All right, so from there, we've updated our manifest, we've updated our NuGet packages, and before you hit run, stop, do not pass go, do not collect $200 because we need to address those breaking API changes that have happened in that transition. And luckily, even though there's a lot of them, we have provided a lot of resources with the list of all the different APIs that have changed, have been broken, or have been moved, as well as solutions for how to fix them. So in my case, my issue is going to deal with this DTE and _DTE typecast failure. So I bet it would be addressed if I just change my namespace to the latest env DTE 80 namespace instead. So going into my code, specifically this issue is going to take place in my one of my shared files. You'll notice that I get an error, but if I'm looking at the Visual Studio 2019 version of this shared file, it's not giving me an error when I use this definition. But if I were to swap over to VS 2022, then it is going to give me the error. So we can just fix this by changing to env DTE 80. And from there, we should be good to go and give this a try and see if the extension has successfully been migrated. So I'm going to set that project as my startup and hit run. So depending on the complexity or the size of your extension, you may have to address a lot of breaking changes, or you might get lucky and not have to address any. So keep in mind, please double check them either way, just to make sure that it's going to work right for all of the users. Okay, so I've got this random project open, and this is a very basic extension that is supposed to write my name as a comment in the doc of my choice. So we're gonna go to edit. That's a good sign. There's my command right there. I'm gonna add my author name to the file. And there we go. So we successfully migrated this extension. Woo! Awesome. So basically the core, in summary, of migrating consists of 2 separate v6 projects tied together by a shared project. Make sure you update your manifests, especially that product architecture tag that you'll need to include for 64-bit. And last but certainly not least, make sure that you are addressing any breaking API changes that might have occurred. All right, so we just finished migrating, but I'm not as happy as I could be because honestly, the time it took me to write that extension was a bit longer than I expected because something as seemingly simple as writing text to a text buffer to a document turned out it was actually really hard to find in a document or online. And then once I finally did find that information, I needed to learn up on several different APIs, which took a long time. So if you've ever been in that situation where it's taken you a long time just to get started applying all of your great extension ideas and implementing them, then we are addressing that by introducing a new toolkit called the Visual Studio Community Toolkit. Emphasis on community here. So this is a completely open source, community-driven project that has the goal of making writing your extensions easier by providing helpful templates, helper methods, and API wrappers, and my personal favorite, visual and textual IntelliSense additions to a lot of the common APIs. And we're also providing more descriptive and accurate documentation with more examples than ever. And also the end game of this toolkit is to provide a smoother transition into the out-of-process extensibility model, which is still a work in progress, but is coming very soon. And that model has the goal of also making writing your extensions easier while also making them more secure and more reliable. So as an experiment, let's try to write that same extension using the Community Toolkit in order to see the differences. All right, so I'm back in VS 2022, and I've already got my project open that I want to use with the Community Toolkit. And I actually used one of the templates that this toolkit gave me, which provided me by default with a commands folder and a my commands file, as well as a VSCT file, which is great. So if you want to get started using this toolkit, make sure that you have this extensions, oh, here we go, Extensibility Essentials 2022 pack installed. So this is a pack that consists of multiple extensions such as Insert GUID and Image Optimizer and just a lot of tools that help expedite some of those everyday extensibility writing tasks that you might experience. So from there, the first thing that I'm going to do is define where I'd like my command to be placed. By default, it's set in Tools, and you'll notice when I hover over Tools, this is awesome. You get a visual representation and IntelliSense of what that window looks like. So it's like a cheat sheet of here are all the different possible locations where you could place your extension in the Tools window. So really great if you're not as familiar with VS or you're not as familiar with all the different IDE choices. So I'm going to change mine to Edit because I like mine to go in the Edit window. There it is. And again, if we compare and contrast, we can go to that same location. And you'll see that this is a lot less intuitive to understand. And there's a lot of IDs that look like this that you may not really know what corresponds to what off the top of your head and will require you to have a doc open at the same time. So less ways, it gives you less of an opportunity to experiment and just test the waters a bit. So we've got that in place. And then I think the most noticeable difference with the toolkit comes when you open up your command file by default. This is awesome. It's only 11 lines versus if you go into your version of the extension that doesn't use the toolkit, there is a lot more going on that you need to consider addressing, such as the initialize async function or service provider. What is service provider? I don't know, but you're going to have to learn up on it when you get started writing your extensions. So if you want just a quick way to put down all of your ideas in one spot and just see your extension running that much faster than having the toolkit in place to define the stuff that's most important to you is great. In this case, the thing that's most important to me is defining what my command is supposed to do once it gets triggered, which is why execute async is here by default. So I'd like to write that same comment, in this case my name, to a text buffer. And as I mentioned before, we have a lot of great documentation for this ongoing toolkit project. My personal favorite is the tips and tricks section, which has a lot of very common scenarios that occur when you're writing an extension that you probably want to know about. And I'm going to copy paste this top one, which will allow me to write text to the active text view. So we're going to add that in. And I'm going to change this to my name. And let's go ahead and hit run. Okay, so we're back with that same random console application that I have, and I'm just gonna add my name to the top of it. So as you can see, I now have the toolkit version of that extension command. And there it is. See how much simpler that was? That was really quick just to put that basic idea on paper and have it out in the world in action like that. So if you want to take advantage of that toolkit, be sure to check out the Extensibility Essentials extension, download it and experiment. And also, because this is open source and community driven, share your feedback and also get involved. So if you've got ideas that only your mind could come up with, the possibilities are endless and you have the power to change it. And that concludes the talk on what's new for extension developers in Visual Studio 2022. We talked about migration, so if you haven't migrated your extension already and want to learn more, be sure to check out the extension support link. We also talked about the toolkit to help make writing your extensions easier. And if you want to learn more about how to get started with that, go to v6cookbook.com. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, that toolkit is going to be a transition into the upcoming out-of-process extensibility model designed to let you write your extensions easier, help your extensions to be more reliable and more secure. So if you'd like to learn more about that, experiment with the initial bits, see samples, and honestly just see any more upcoming announcements in the world of Visual Studio Extensibility, be sure to check out the VS Extensibility repo. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for providing all of your awesome extensibility ideas to help users be more productive across Visual Studio. And until next time, happy coding.